The first picture shows the original front of the tree. You can see significant reverse taper at the first branch. The goal of the repot was to hide the reverse taper to have a more aesthetically pleasing presentation. The second photo shows the tree rotated counterclockwise and the left side of the tree was elevated. The third photo shows the tree styled and wired to accommodate the new planting angle. It's important to wire the tree at the new angle before you repot. Once you repot the tree, you do not want to disturb the roots with wiring the tree. The last photo reveals the tree planted at its new angle. The video highlights the repotting process and steps taken to allow this tree to sit at its new angle and maintain enough root mass to recover. This is a Carpinifolia Elm that has been had structural work performed on it. A number of branches were removed. It was in a pine style bonsai, and because there was significant reverse taper, and I'm going to turn the tree so you can see where there was a major swelling. And you can see at the very first branch how much swelling there is around the tree, which appears to me to be unattractive, and it was the result of letting a sacrifice branch grow too long and the collar thickened. So rather than present the tree as this was the original front, the tree has now been turned to try to hide some of that reverse taper, and as a result of turning it, the pot was also tilted to create a new planting angle. This will be a standard deciduous repot. However, you can see the high end is going to have to be reduced, and the low end farther away on the right hand side also reduced to set this tree in a pot at this angle. So I will be working on that next. The first thing I'm going to do before I start the repot is to scrape off the moss, save it, and screen it and use it for my top dressing when I have completed the repot. It is a good idea to take a picture of the proposed front and angle, because once you remove the tree from the pot and start working on the root ball, it may provide you the opportunity to go back to see where you need to reduce and where the greatest limitations are on the root ball. In this case, the upper left side needs to be reduced significantly, and the bottom back right needs to be reduced for this to sit at this proposed planting angle. I will be teasing off the moss from the root mass and take advantage of it. And so I just use a chopstick and go along and pull it off and set it on the screen as I go so that I can break it up, mix it with 50% sphagnum, and reuse it to top dress the new soil that I will be putting into the pot. I've got a lot of the moss off, but there, however, is moss on some of the trunk, and I would like to get that off. There's moss in there, so I take a nylon brush that's not too hard. I'm going to damage the bark and brush that off. I also have a toothbrush to get the smaller spots. And I will be able to use this so I'm using it to brush that off, and I'll be able to also include that in the moss that I'm saving. In the little areas, I use a toothbrush to get those areas. You can see the moss breaking away a little bit, and I'm going to pick that up. If you like leaving the moss on because you like the look, feel free to do that. One of the things that also can happen is, despite that I'm brushing it away, it's probably likely to reappear, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Moss has spores and will routinely reassert itself when given the right conditions in terms of the right organic matter available for it, as well as the right moisture. And you can see I'm getting a little more moss, and I'm going to save it for the repot. The other thing that can be done to get rid of moss, if you'd like, would be to dab or carefully spray vinegar on it. The acid will kill it. Be careful not to get the acid into the soil, because that can change your pH. So you could use Q-tips or whatever, and repeatedly dab it, and over the course of time it will turn brown and stop growing. Under normal circumstances, now that I've removed the moss, I would take a comma and scrape around the outside edge. This is a comma, and it's a scraping tool. It's not a cutting tool, so I would lightly go along the outside edge and scrape to slowly work the soil down so that I would be able to easily remove this tree from the pot. However, since I'm going to want to reduce this high side of the pot, I'm going to temporarily leave it in here to work some of the soil to know where I need to reduce it, and then I'm going to remove it. I'm doing this so it's easy for me to remember how much to reduce. So I can see this is the highest part of my root ball, so I'm just merely going to go in and start scraping. I might get a few pieces of moss and be able to throw them in there. And I'm going to slowly use my chopstick to work the soil out of the roots and slowly reduce the size of this area. And again, I'm not going to completely do it in the pot, but I want to have a good idea of where I need to reduce this material when I pull it out, and it will be helpful to have this as a reminder as to where that's going to occur. So by loosening this up, when I pull it out, I'll know this is where I need to start working on the reduction. Before removing the pot, the first thing you do is look at the bottom, or before removing the root mass from the pot, the first thing you do is look at the bottom and find where your tie-down wires are. In this case here are my tie-down wires. However, they've rusted out. So it's actually going to be a pretty simple process to remove those wires. Take a wire cutter and clip them off. I'm going to start using a different, I use electrical galvanized steel now, wire. I used to use just galvanized steel 17 millimeters, and now I'm using the electrical. I think that will reduce rusting. So in this point, the tree no longer should be tied down, and it might be possible to remove this tree directly from the pot. However, usually the roots swell into the sides of the pot and make it difficult to remove. In this case, you can see there is a little movement in the root ball. Let me stand up and see whether I'm going to need to use the comma or not to get this out. Yes, it's pulling on it, so I will use the comma to do that. And the use of the comma, as I said, is a scraping tool. And you just take it along the edge and slowly scrape. This is not a tool that you can hurry with. Take your time. You want to slowly scrape the soil away. You're also going to be removing roots that are on the outside edge. Turntable here so I can turn it. And even though you are tearing up the roots with the comma because you're not doing clean cuts, the roots that are this far out ultimately will be removed and cut. And so it's not a problem that you are sort of tearing the outside roots up, because these roots ultimately will be cut off cleanly, but they will be cut off in a little bit or deeper or closer to the trunk than they currently exist. And we want to be able to extract the root ball from this pot without tearing up the other roots. As you noticed, is when I tried to pull it out, the root ball started to flex and the center started to pull out, but the outsides weren't coming out. So I want to make sure this comes out cleanly. This tree was only repotted 2 years ago, so I might not see the amount of roots on this that I would see had I left this in one more year, which I had planned to do. But since I've decided to change the potting angle and the aesthetics of this tree, I have decided to repot it at this time. This is one of the reasons we repot. Either the soil is no longer percolating, the soil has too much decomposition and we're getting anaerobic activity, which is unhealthy for the roots, or we have a style change. And a style change can only be implemented usually after the tree has been in 2 years. To repot a tree after it's been in a pot for 1 year is probably not a good choice, as it probably will not have enough roots to sustain itself. I've used the comb and mostly reduced the outside edge. I'm just going to do a little bit more. And again, I'm reminded this is the side that I need to reduce the top, and this is the side that I need to reduce the bottom to accommodate the new angle with which I would like to place this tree in a pot. So I'm going to see if it can come out. My hands are clean. I try to have clean hands when dealing with your trees to avoid staining the bark, as well as if you have very nice bark on that, sometimes it'll break it off or whatever and destroy some of the qualities that you like in the tree. So the tree was extracted relatively simply, and we will be ready to work the roots. We are now ready to work the roots. I have placed gloves on my hands, not because I'm worried about infecting the tree, but I'm old. My hands dry out excessively, so I like having the gloves to reduce that. So right now I'm going to be scraping away the soil and looking to go rather deep. If this were a typical repot, I were going to plant at the same angle, I would go around the whole root ball and equally remove soil, because it would be returning to the pot in the same angle, and so I would want a flat root ball to stick in the bottom. In this case, I'm going to be tilting it, so I need to significantly reduce this end of the root ball. I'm trying to not hold this really hard, although sometimes I think I am. I'd like to leave it, have some flexibility, so if I hit something hard, it will slip over it rather than try to pull it out. Although I will be having to cut off a lot of these roots anyway, because I need to eliminate them so that they will not be up in the air. Okay. And I will probably have roots that will be up in the air that I might not be able to eliminate the first time I repot this, and it may be a process by which I will have to slowly work this down over the course of its bonsai life. As you are working the roots, occasionally this root here is a small root that's crossing. So I go in and cleanly remove it, which allows me to continue to work on the tree and work the roots until I get more and more shallow, with the attempt to be able to tilt the tree up. So you work the area with the greatest limitations first, and you try to save roots in the other area that will help the tree regenerate when you replant it, rather than just going at every one of the roots equally. I have done a pretty good job of reducing the roots. I'm not sure that they're enough. Also knowing that this is a deciduous tree, this can tolerate more root work and more removal of soil, because deciduous trees are more tolerant of that than conifers. So if I were doing this to a conifer, I might have to do this in stages and might not be able to accomplish as much. I've pretty much got this size worked out. I'm not sure it's sufficient, but I'm going to turn the tree around because I need to now work the opposite side, and I need to reduce the root mass that is underneath so it can sit in that tilted fashion that I would like to accomplish. So I want to be able to remove the roots, and I'm going to stick it deeper in the pot, and I need to remove these so it can accomplish that. So I have tilted the root ball so I can work on that side, and I'm using wooden blocks, and I'll move the camera over there so you can see the blocks to help hold the tree without allowing any of the branches to bump. So that should hold the tree, but I have to be careful when I actually start to remove the roots on the side that I wish to do that. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. And the roots that need to be worked are over here. You can see the mat of roots on here. So this tree possibly could have stayed in one more year, but it's getting a dense root mat on the bottom. So I have to remove that mat over there, and I will start that process. Rather than use the chopstick here on the root mat, I take a paint scraper and use the sharp edge, knowing that this is going to be the front of my tree over here. So back here is going to be the back, and this is the part that needs to come down. So I slowly take the edge of the corner of the paint scraper to remove a lot of the root mat that's on that, which makes it a lot easier than having to chopstick it. I'm also going to remove some of the mat that was on the back end, which I didn't get to because I worked the top first. This mat, as stated, is not nearly as dense as it could have been, and as I said earlier, now that I'm looking at it, I think it could have tolerated being in this pot another year had I not considered an angle change. So again, this is where I know the front is, so back here is the part that needs to go definitely deeper. And I still have to get rid of the mats, the matted roots all the way around anyway, even on the side that I first worked. So sometimes I will pull them and go in and sharply cut them to work on them. Now I'm going to use the chopstick and gently scrape away some of the bottom soil. You can see a lot of the lava, red lava and the pumice coming out. A lot of the akadama is still intact. So this was a 1-1-1 mix when I worked on this tree. So again, I probably will thin this tree out and take many more roots off than I might have had this been a typical repot, because I'm going to try to get it into a much smaller pot. So again, trying to work the bottom, because this is the part that I would like to be deeper in the pot when I set it down than the other side. Scraping a little off of the center, and you can see it's slowly decaying. Actually, that soil, there's less roots in the center. This would be considered the sheen, and there is not as much root yet in there because roots occupy the outside first, the bottom second, and the inside last, because that is where the least amount of heat is, and it also is the least amount of oxygen for a tree. So still can feel some roots, and I'm taking the scissors in that are circling the pot, that are going in a circle, and I'm trying to reduce those. You can see that a lot of the roots are scarred up, and before I finish I will need to cut those cleanly, because they're not likely to heal as well as fresh, cleanly cut roots. So I'm almost near the top part of the tree from underneath. And again, under normal circumstances I would have worked the top, but in this case I need to have this sit deeply in the pot when I repot it. And I'm not sure that the pot I have will be the one that will actually accommodate this tree, and I may be stuck sticking this in something less than desirable. I am now testing out how it looks, and you can see that the tree is now, the flatness has allowed the tree to lean backwards to the new planting angle. I still think I need to work off soil that's closest to the base, closest towards us, to reduce that, to increase the angle even a little bit more. The bottom has been dropped off, and since this tree has to be turned to fit into the pot, this is so that the oval had created a longer length, so I will have to cut roots off the sides, but I'm going to work the top that's closest to us a little bit more. I am going to get a little of the topsoil off the back because I want to make sure I have good percolation, meaning that the water is able to get through, so I want any decomposed material, akadama or old organic material like leaves or dead roots or whatever off. So I'm going to work this down a little bit more, again, so when I attempt to fit it into the pot, a lot less will be hanging up above. And I'm also going to reduce that. One of the things I'm trying to do, although I'm not always when you are working the roots, don't go across, try to work out from the center of the trunk out towards the roots, for a couple reasons. We want our roots coming off of the base of the trunk in like a spoke-like fashion, and ones that are going across are not as desirable. And this will catch the ones that are going in the direction that you do not want, and this will encourage that the roots will come off in a more spiral fashion. This is the end of the root ball that I took the bottom off, and it's very thin. So I'm being pretty light with the chopstick, working off the topsoil. There's actually some old moss in there as well. Might grab some of that and throw it into my moss container. But again, trying to slowly work off the broken down akadama. Akadama is a clay particle that will break down. It's fragile, relatively fragile. Pumice and lava tend not to break down. And so this is going to allow us to have better percolation once we integrate the new soil. Here's some areas of moss that I didn't get. Actually, I'm going to grab my little brush if I can find it. And brush off the moss from that. Sometimes I will gently take the toothbrush, and this I find less troubling on the roots, to wash off some of that, not wash off, but to brush off some of the composted soil. And it is a gentle way to get some of that finer particles off of the top of the root ball, which can clog up the system. There's some moss there I'm trying to work. Remember, in some ways, this is tree surgery. This is what ultimately is critical to the functioning of the tree, and the roots are also the heart in where, or not the heart, but basically where immunity from diseases and pests, not immunity, but their ability to deal with infections and pests comes from. So a healthy root system typically with good biological activity, at least in the native environment, is where a tree is able to fend off. We have an immunity system, and their ability to deal with pests and immunity to fungus and bacteria, etc., comes from the healthy root system. I have set the tree on the turntable with the angle change and am looking at it to make sure it's the way I want it, which it looks pretty good. So I'm going to attempt to set it into the pot and figure out now on the outside edges where I need to cut back for it to fit the pot. This was the original planting angle, so the length of the root ball goes from left to right. The new planting angle in this pot would have the mass going such as from front to back, which is going to be a challenge. So I'm going to cut the roots on here and back there to see if I can get them in. I do have a backup pot that's a little bit bigger that actually might be better, but that would be what I would do to see if I could fit it back in this pot by cutting back the sides of the roots towards the root ball. Where you see the sticks are approximately where I would have to cut the root ball back. That would not be a problem in the front. However, if you look in the back, you can see a root that might not be reducible, which might make fitting it into the original pot a problem. I am going to cut back the roots somewhat, and as I said, I do have a backup pot that's much wider that would not require that. This root here is the one that's going to be a limitation, as it would go on the shout from the front to back. And I am going to remove some of this because there appears to be healthy roots a little bit closer. So I'm going to slowly reduce to see if there is the possibility that I would be able to get that in. There feel like there are some other roots, so it is possible I should be able to cut this, and the roots behind it should be able to continue to support that piece of root. Though I could have got it into the original pot, I would have had to cut a little more root off the back just to squeeze it in. It would have worked. After consulting with my artistic consultant, my wife, we looked at this one and thinks it also is a nice pot, which doesn't require any more root reduction, which would be easier on the tree. Also, it gives the tree a different look in a more in a glazed pot. It tends to have a more sort of elegant feel to it. When setting the angle, one looks at the legs of the feet of the pot to make sure that they're set exactly where you want them, and then you place the tree exactly where you want it at its angle and its position in the pot. I tend to want to center the tree, and I'm going to try to work on creating some asymmetrical balance in the tree. So what I will do now is look to figure out where I'm going to anchor the tree. Under normal circumstances, when you anchor a tree into a pot, you need 3 anchor points, just like a stool, 2 anchor points, and you got problems with a wobble. You could do 4 if you really want to, but 3 should be sufficient as long as they're equidistant. Now, if the tree has a lean, the first anchor wants to counteract the strongest lean. If it's left or right or back, forward, whatever, that's going to be the first one you're going to set your anchor. The second one would be if it has a secondary lean. So, for instance, in this case, the tree is leaning to the right, and it also looks like it's slightly leaning backward. So if it's leaning to the right, our first anchor point that we should put in is the left. The second one should be in the front. And the third one will be more the back left. So once the tree is anchored, it won't rebound and pull away and fall into the original anchors. The other possibility that you can consider an anchor point on an established root ball tree, if it has a nice firm root base, that can be considered one anchor point. And then the 2 other anchor points could be directly opposite. They could be front back, left right, or from one corner to one corner, and those 3 anchor points should provide the stability that you need. I have set the tree where I want it, and then I'm going to be looking for my anchor points. I have a root that's going to be below the soil line here, which I can connect to. I could also put in a bamboo tie down as well, because the root base is pretty thick right there, but I think I will be able to tie down right there. And I put a little chalk mark right below that root, and it turns out there's one of the holes for the pot is right there, so I will easily be able to put a piece of wire through the hole without having to drill. Since this has a very stable base and I like where it is, I only need 2 tie down points to that. And I will go opposite this to see if I have one over there. And I do have a root that's strong, that's going to be below the soil line, and I lift it up, and luckily there's also a hole there that I will be able to take advantage of, and or drive a bamboo stake in there, which I think might be just as good, and maybe I will do that as well. So the other thing I do at this point is I try to mark prominent roots where they are. So when I go back to lining up the tree, I have some perspective and memory of exactly how I had the tree, so that when I place it in, I am pretty confident that I'm going to be planting it at the angle and the rotation in the pot that I desire. Because this pot has some wire holes, one and one there, one and one there, I've decided to use those, and I'm going to use a bamboo bridge across the root ball that I will demonstrate after I get this pot, put the wires on, as well as put the drain screens in. Before I turn the pot over, I also have to remember which part was my front and which part is the back. And I remember by putting this white dot here that is the white chalk mark, that is the back of the pot. So that when I put the tree in, where the holes are and where the wires are, it will match, period. If you flip it accidentally and don't recall, it can screw up your tie down. I use galvanized electric fence wire, 17 gauge, and you get a 1/4 mile, which is a lot of wire. And the reason I use galvanized wire on bigger trees is that it is stronger, and it does not stretch as aluminum might, and or copper for that matter. Also, it's relatively inexpensive. When cutting the wire, I've cut 3 pieces, I have 1 more to cut. I put my wire over to imagine it has to go bridge the distance between those 2 wire holes, and then I need extra length to come up through, so I'll be able to twist tie. Don't cut these short, because if you bring them through and they're short and they're very short, you can't get them through the root ball and work to be able to tie it down. So I cut 2 equal size, and since I'm over here, I'm going to do the same thing. Typically what I do is be careful when you always hold on to this. If you don't, the whole thing will unspiral. Not completely, but it'll be a little bit of a mess. So what I do is I get an idea about where they are and how much extra wire I want to hang over the edge. Do the same thing over here. Measure out a decent amount. And when I go to cut it, I hold this end so it doesn't spring away, and I cut the wire at a very sharp angle so it makes it like a needle, so I can easily use it to push through the roots if I need to, without damaging them too much. So I cut it like that, put that back in there so it doesn't unwind, get that out of the way, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's a very sharp point on both ends. What I will do next is I will next measure the wire so that I have equal length on either side of the hole. I will take my pliers, hold them, and make a 90-degree angle so that it can go through. I will carefully measure to make sure that that wire is easily able to go through that hole, and it's better to overestimate a little bit than to under. You can always go back and rebend it if you don't get it right. And I'll take my pliers here, hold it sharply, and also do another 90-degree bend. And I will repeat that for the next 3 pieces. I'll do it one more time. Put it where the holes are approximately, and I just use the length from thumb to fingertip to get an idea about how long they are. This one is a little shorter than the other side. Again, put my pliers on to where it is. I tend to, if it's arcing that way, I tend to put the arc so it's going to be up against the base of the pot. Again, know it's going through there. Use my fingers to line up about where the next 90 degree needs to be. Hold it tight and make it 90. Then I will go to the other side and accomplish the same thing. Before you place the wire screens in the wire holes, you need to cut out drain screens for the holes in the pot so that the aggregate soil doesn't fall out. What I tend to do is, in this case these holes are slightly smaller. I line them up, figure out where I need to cut, and I usually want 2 to 3 rows a little bit beyond the hole. So in this case I have 2 holes about the same size, and I just go down and cut all the way through, trying to stay on line. Put it there. Like I said, go about maybe 3 rows over approximately. There's no rule on that. I just don't want them falling through. I cut the one, got the same hole there. Use that as my measuring. And we'll have those 2 ready for those. These 3 holes in the center are larger, so I do the same thing with these. I now have, in this case, 5 screens that I need to secure to the inside of the pot. And I will use 2mm aluminum wire to accomplish that. I take the aluminum wire and place it over the hole, knowing that's about the approximate length that I'm going to need to go the depth of the hole and then come out there. So I hold it up there. I take a pliers and then wrap around to a 90 degree turn. I then take the leg of that and measure to the other side, put my pliers where the edge of the hole is, and I go in reverse. I make a reverse loop. Again, in this case the wire went underneath, so I make the reverse loop. Whoop, lost control, we'll have to redo that. Set it up here, place there, hold that securely, and the reverse loop is going to be on top, so that width there is approximately the width of the diameter of the hole. It doesn't have to be exact. These are aluminum wire and they're very flexible, and I will cut that to approximately the same length as the other leg. They don't have to be exact. I will now go through and make 4 more of them. Now that I've created all of my wires that are going to hold the drain screens, and make sure that the wires go across the same side. You don't have one going across the top and one going underneath. Then take my pliers, hold it tightly, and make a 90 degree bend on all of them. That's one of the smaller ones. And the wire, I'm bending it down, is on top of the cross wire. So if you look closely, you can see the wires on top, and make it like that. The next thing that I do, that I have these wire tie downs to hold the screens, is just to make sure approximately the width is basically approximately the width of the hole. in this case, then I will go and place the holes at approximately the center of the screen. I should turn the pot over, otherwise I'm going to be putting in, these are upside down. So you will notice this is the smaller one. I put it through the hole, hold the 2 loops with my thumb and finger, and tightly pull and bend the wire tie downs so that they hold the screen. And I will go through that and do that for the next 4 holes. When you have completed all of your anchoring of the screens, this is what the bottom of the pot will look like, and this is what the top of the pot will look like. Before I knew better, I used to use my anchor wire that I would anchor the tree on, put it between these as anchor spots, but they are not solid and they can pull right out, so do not attempt to use these to anchor your anchor wires. The next thing I'm going to do is place my anchor wires in, and I should have done this first, then made the anchor wires, because now I'm not sure which holes they were made for, so I have to go look. That looks like those will work there. That's good. So I should have put the screens in and then measured out my anchor wires, because luckily these are almost symmetrical, but under normal circumstances, you usually don't get even anchors as this. So then I will take my anchor wires and place them through the wire holes that were pre-drilled or pre-made for this pot. If they were not and I needed a hole here, I would get a ceramic bit on a drill and use spray water to keep it moist and lubricated and slowly drill a hole through here. I would start in the top of the pot drilling. In other words, if I had a spot here that I wanted to drill, I would start drilling there. When I felt that it was coming through and I could see the wee little hole, I would turn it over and then drill from this end so I don't bust out the ceramic. And when you drill holes, the initial hole going in is much cleaner than the hole coming out. So I have to pick up my wire. Found my other tie-down wires, and I'm putting them through the pre-made wire holes. I then pick up the pot and replace wires that fell out. And it's important that you cut the lengths so that these are flat, and try to have the wire that's here not directly across or whatever. So those wires are flat. So what I do is I grab both ends. Try to grab both ends. Let me put this down. And pull through and pull these out a little bit so it keeps it tight. I do the same thing over here. Hold them and pull tight on these and put them over so that they're less likely to fall out. When you wire the tree into the pot, look at the bottom to make sure those anchor wires there's no slack in those wires. You want them firm against the top. Now again, I put that there to remind me that that is the back of the tree. And now what I'm going to do is bring the tree over and cut my bamboo bridges. The bridges that I will cut need to be longer than the distance between the holes with which I will be holding down the tree. So I can have these bridges basically the length from wall to wall, probably just a little inside of that. Bamboo, if I would attempt to cut it right here, not near a node, it would crush it and splinter into pieces. So I take these and slowly score the bamboo with the cutters, and then I slowly turn them with adding a little bit of pressure each time so that I don't crush the bamboo and come out with a firm piece of bamboo during the process. Sometimes it's difficult to stay on the same line, but I slowly try to apply pressure. First time you do it, you might break or crush it, but you just slowly add pressure and whittle your way through the hard outside surface of the bamboo. The hard outside surface is fairly rot resistant. The inside, however, my experience with these has been they've lasted the length of the time they've been in the pot. So I cut a nice one that way, and I will do the same thing over here. I have now cut 2 bridges. If I wanted to use these for bamboo tie down and I wanted to jam them into the root ball because the root ball was thick enough and would be able to support them being in there and function as an anchor, I would take this to a rough surface. If you could use sanding, you could sand them, but I just go outside where my driveway has a rough surface of concrete, and I rub them back and forth, back and forth, back and forth till I get a nice sharp edge. And then I turn it a little bit on the side and go that way, a little on the side that go, so it has a sharp edge and comes to a point, and I can easily either press that into the root ball or hammer it in if I can't get it in. In this case, I'm going to use them as bridges across the top so they do not need to be sharp. And I just want to make sure that I cut them to the length necessary so that I will be able to pull the tie downs over top and have extra. The other thing you need to be thinking about is when you have a tie down strategy is you try to get it to below the surface of the aggregate soil so that all of the man-made work is hidden. In this case, I think we will accomplish that. So in this case, I will have 2 points of contact in addition to the base, but actually in some ways when you think about it, I will have multiple points of contact because contact across the root base will be all the way through here and here as well as the bottom. So this should be a pretty powerful way of anchoring the tree. The other possibility would be to not have 2, but just have one going from here to here and pulling them over across the root base and tying them down. I not particularly like doing that because sometimes you can tear the roots as you're pulling them through. I like to go straight up through the roots. And again, earlier I cut these at an angle so that if the root mass came out here, I would be able to thread them through the root mass. That sharp point would help them come through. If they didn't, I do have it's a tent stake that are thinner than a pencil and I would stick that through and create the holes that I want, and then I would attempt to leave through those 2 holes. I would take this twist tie, push them there so that they were hanging out the bottom of the hole so that when I went looking for them, I would be able to find them easier. On deciduous trees, I tend to use a more water holding mix in general. The typical Boone's mix is 1 part lava, 1 part akadama, which is the brown stuff, and 1 part pumice. I have also used akadama and pumice with no lava, which is a more water holding mix. This is a mix that tends to be used for conifers and pines, but it also can be used for deciduous. And the advantage is that it tends to drain, not hold as much water, and be a little more oxygen rich. So I'm actually doing some experimenting with my trees. In some trees, deciduous trees, I'm mixing a half akadama, half pumice. And in this one, I'm going to try the Boone's mix. I've used it on this tree in the past and it seemed to do well, so I will do that. Also, this is a 1/4-inch screen, so anything that doesn't fall through this, I will use as an aeration layer. And so the idea of an aeration layer, and again, this could be some people think it is useless, The idea is that oxygen exchange in the root system is important. And so over the holes and in the bottom of the pot, when it does drain, there's a more opportunity for oxygen to enter the system from below. I try to put a 1 layer of 1/4 inch or and above pumice, akadama, and lava. Anytime you use an aeration layer, it should be made of the exact same components that the potting soil will be as well. The next soil I will be mixing in will be again a mixture of lava, pumice, and akadama. This screen here that I use is slightly larger than a 1/16 of an inch. They're millimeters and I can't remember exactly what it is. So all of the soil that I put in to my pots, I will get put on this screen. Anything that falls through, I don't use in a potting mix. Anything that stays above, I will use as part of the part of the mix. I also have a 1/4 inch screen. This is a 1/4 inch screen, which happens to be holding some of the moss I took off, which I should place in here. And I will be adding some sphagnum to that. But 1/4 inch screen, anything that falls through this will be part of the inner mix, which I just talked about. Anything that stays above, I put that in my aeration layer. I prepare enough soil or aggregate soil to fill up the entire bonsai pot after I put the tree in, so I have enough to make sure that I do an adequate repot. This has been screened, meaning all of the soil that has been put in this pot went through the 1/16. Anything that fell through is out, which reduces some of the small particle size that can clog the holes. Also, as you are working with this soil and you're chopsticking it, you will create some pumice. You will create some dust and smaller particles, which you will then wash out at the end. So what I will do next is I'm going to get the tree and set it in at the angle and where I need it to be set. When I go to use the bridges, I can see that I did not think through the entire process. This bridge is going to work quite well because there are no above ground roots that will be exposed, and the one that is there will be below, and so that will work and function actually as 2 anchor points. This one, however, is not going to work out well. So what I'm going to have to do is to create the bamboo tie-down strategy where I will create points, drive bamboo into here, and then bamboo into this side to be able to use these. I was able to drive a long stake from here, which I need to tie down, all the way back through there. And I think that's going to work unless it makes the tree tilted, and I'm going to set it in the pot to see in fact if that can work. This tie down will still work over there. The problem is this has been driven at an angle that it lifts up the back end of this, so that is not going to work. So what I will do is pull it out, leave most of it in, that isn't pushing up the other end, which that's good. And in this case, I will cut the bamboo stake approximately. Let's see where I'm going to need to do that. I'm going to cut a little of it off, and I don't have to worry, there's a node there, so if I actually crush this bamboo here, it's not as big of a problem because it shouldn't crush through the internode there that has the extra bulky part of the wood. so that's going to stay. And I need to place something back there. I'm going to take another sharpened piece of bamboo and stick it right in under here. As it pushes up, it'll hit those roots, and there's enough roots that both of those are now stable. I'm going to pick the tree up. Again, trying to keep my hands clean, not to stain it and ruin the bark. And I'm going to set it approximately, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to set it approximately without disturbing the soil underneath to make sure that those tie downs are where I'd like them to be. I'm going to pick the tree up and not disturb the aeration layer underneath. And I left my marks to see. So again, I'm pretty good at knowing where some of the things should be. And these tie downs are pretty close to being straight underneath where they need to be. Turn this a little. Pick it up when you turn it. Try not to disturb the mass that you have underneath. Don't just use your chalk lines. Make sure you look to make sure it's set in there the way you want it. My original plan for tying this down was a massive failure. So I had to reconsider what I was doing, and I went through and ultimately am using the bamboo tie down method, where I have sharp pointed bamboo tie downs put into the root ball where the corners will meet, and I will tie the tree down that way. So I think I'm going to leave on the earlier part, which is a way to do it. But I'm also leaving the screw up on to realize that screw ups occur, and then you have to be resourceful to figure out strategies. I was stuck with having now 4 tie downs, and actually I have 5 points of contact. I have the root base, and I have 4. I have many more than I need. At the same time, I don't want to pull everything out and do the rewiring, and this seemed simpler, and it's a little bit of overkill for the tie down, but it's not going to harm the tree, and I'm not going to be messing with the roots. The next thing I want to do is to make sure I have the tree planted in the pot where I want it at the right angle, etc. So I will go up and make sure the tree is exactly where I want it before I start tying it down. It is important to look at the tree from the side to make sure it's front to back. Depth is where you want it. And if the tree has a slight lean, you want the tree to be coming slightly forward so that it is welcoming, and it makes it easier, not easier, it makes a more attractive aesthetic. Also, when it's leaning a little bit, you don't see up into the upper part of the tree. When I went to observe the tree for front to back, I realized the tree was leaning a little bit back. So I stuck this stake underneath to hold it there, and I will be adding a little more soil so it doesn't collapse on that, which will help me set it. The other thing I can do is, since some of the weight is going, I want to make sure it holds there. First of all, I pull these tight. I'm going to look very carefully under the bottom to make sure that they are tight. The front one actually is tight on this side, but not tight on the other side. So I'm going to pull this tight and pull that tight, as well as that tight. And again, look, they should be good when I pull again, because they can't stay completely tight. So I'm going to make sure I pull them up. And I am going to stick a little bit of soil back here to help stabilize the back so it doesn't fall before I completely fill it. And I will be using a mix of lava pumice and akadama, which is considered to be Boone's mix. So what I'm going to actually do is lift this up just, oh, I'm glad I remembered that. What I'm going to be doing is taking the tree out, leaving that there, and what I'm going to do is take a layer of soil that is the inner soil and create a 1 layer thick on top of the aeration layer. In other words, I'm going to do what I do with the aeration layer with the inner soil and create a 1 layer thick layer. That's rather redundant. And then in the center, you create a little mound or a volcano. You don't want it too big, but you want it enough. And again, this takes time to figure that out. And I'm going to be sticking a little bit more to the back because I know I want this to be tilting. As I set the tree on, that soil will start to even out and fill in the spaces underneath the root ball. I also, on the root ball, pause. Before I incorporate the root ball or put this mass of roots into the pot, I want to make sure I clean up the roots, which I'm not sure I did earlier, and have clean cuts on the roots. I can also use my little blocks if I need to tilt the tree to hold it so that I can work a little more comfortably on the roots while it doesn't fall over. There are some circling roots that I missed that I should have done earlier. These are the ones that were at the bottom where I was reducing the top, so I didn't want to get rid of too many of those initially, but I need to go through and create some areas that I will be able to integrate the roots into the new soil. And if I see where I've damaged roots or whatever, and there's little fine white ones that were structure's been damaged, I can go through and cut them cleanly. I don't want to leave a lot of long roots at the bottom, but I want to leave some so that they can integrate into the soil. If I leave them real heavy, they will mat, and I don't want to have that happen when I'm doing a new repot. I'm going to be putting soil under here, and I want some of these roots that are just barely hanging below the sheen in the bottom of the soil to be able to integrate into what's going in the soil in the bottom of the pot. Lift that up, look around, again, cut off any slightly long hairs. I don't want to cut everything real tight like my haircut where things are within 1/8 of an inch of my scalp. I want to leave some fuzzies all the way around as well so I can integrate it. And so sometimes I just go along and tap to create where some of that soil falls out. At the same time, I'm not really disturbing and messing with the roots, and they're likely to stay a little more healthy. So by doing that, I'm now allowing for the new soil to integrate. When you are placing your tree in the pot, make sure the pot is centered. I look at the feet and make sure they're equal distance on each side. And then I've set the tree gently on top of that volcano of soil to make sure that's where I want it to be, and I'm going to slowly wiggle it and settle the soil. I put a little bit behind it because I wanted it to tilt forward a little more than typical. Again, you don't want to make the mass of the volcano too big, and it comes with experience how much to put or how little to put. So I'm in a second here going to settle the tree once I make sure that it's in the angle and position I want. This is where I want the tree, and I'm going to go up to it and try to settle it and hopefully keep it in the same angle and position. And you just make sure I get my turntable stable. And I'm going to just, this spreads the soil out, the volcano, under the root ball and evenly distributes it. I'm trying to fill in any pockets that are like concave pockets in the root ball. And this should add to some of the stability. After you think you've settled it, again, walk back and look to see if it's the position that you want. I am going to start the tie down process, and I'm going to start with the back left since the tree leans to the right and slightly forward. The next one I will tie down will be the back right, since it's slightly forward, and then after that I will tie down the ones in the front, which would avoid rebounds. In this case I have 4 wires, which is unnecessary, but at this point, since I put them in, I have to use them for all the wires to be functional. So then I will tie down the front. I will not tie down everything incredibly firm, but mildly firm so it holds it, and then I can slowly tie things down. For tying it down, you need your pliers and wire cutters. And we decided that we are going to do the wires in the back first. And when you tie down, you pull up on the wires to make sure you get any slack out of the bottom. And I'm feeling underneath to make sure I got that slack. And then what I do is whatever you do, I always tend to cross my wires in the same direction, so if I forget what I'm doing or whatever, it helps me to mind. So I always do mine clockwise, but you can do them whatever way, but I always turn them all the same way. And so in this case, I'm using my thumb and finger to make the first twist. And it's important that the wires twist around each other rather than one wire twisting around each other. So you won't see me holding the wire up and turning one around. I grab both of them and twist them equally. Otherwise, it doesn't work as well. Again, the other thing I do is I pull tight. We were working on tying down the bamboo tie downs. We were turning right. We've already semi-stabilized them in the back. And I'm going to semi-stabilize them here. You pull tight, pull the extra slack out, relax, and twist. Pull tight, relax, twist. I'm going to do this one here. An extra turn in before we get started. So pull tight, relax, twist. Pull tight, relax, twist. Tight, relax, twist. And there's some, you can't go back, It is coming forward a little bit, so the ones in the back need to be tightened. So again, pull tight, relax, twist. I can feel the slack on this one. But there's a lot of slack there. So relax, twist. Start to see it closing the gap on the bamboo tie down. Sometimes you can push the tie down a little bit. Take a little pressure. Still going down. So I can't push it forward. Well, actually, just a little. I can pull it just a little that way, so I'm going to need to go up there. I can come back both of these ways. So I still need a little more on this one. Pull tight, relax, twist. When you think you're close, do no more than a turn, and sometimes just a half turn. See where you're at. Almost there. Another half turn. There's no wiggle room on any of these. Left, right, that's the pot wiggling actually. So everything's tied down. We now cut the ties that we made. Just leave a few turns so that you can push down in the direction that they were going. Trying to hide your work so that it doesn't detract from the aesthetic that you're trying to achieve. That's accomplished. Now we're going to do the bulk fill, where we're going to fill up the entire pot with more soil than we probably need. We have filled up the pot with soil, and we're going to go around the edge, pushing in the chopstick, wiggling or chopsticking up and down to have soil fall down in. The idea is to make sure that soil gets up under the root ball where it starts to curve up towards the surface. And we have the extra soil falling down to fill the space so we don't have to go back and keep adding it. I'm keeping my left hand over top to hold the soil so it doesn't push the roots up and out, because the more soil that you push under the root ball, it will lift up and slowly push the roots. When you start seeing roots getting to the surface, it would be a good time to stop, because you know you've got the soil up and under. The other thing is, I'm starting at the front of the tree. A good strategy is to place something to remind yourself where you were chopsticking. So I will push this here so I don't lose track. I'm going to turn the tree so I have easy access. And again, push all the way down the side. The hard end of the chopstick up against the pot that doesn't break down as easily. The softer wood is towards the center. We use a pointed one so it gets through the aggregate without busting up as much of the soil as we can do. And we are slowly working our way around the pot. Try to do this systematically, because you want to do this as much as needed, but no more than necessary, because when you do this is potentially can break up the particles of soil, especially the akadama, because it's a much more fragile product than the pumice and the lava. We're coming around. And as long as you see soil constantly falling in and it's using up soil, stay there and wiggle until you stop seeing it fall in. And I'm bringing down soil from above to filter in. The other reason I brought it over here on the table to work on is and I used a clean tablecloth, I cleaned all the old dirt off, is that you can keep the soil that comes over the edge, which it will do. The next thing, I'm almost around to the front. We shall finish that off. Okay. The thing I'm going to do now, while I'm thinking about it, is cut off the ends of these bamboo tie downs, and to again try to hide that they exist. I see where the wire is. I want to leave a little bit more than where the wire is. And then put the soil back on, again, to try to hide them. If they aren't popping up in the other places, that's a good sign they're probably deep enough. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is, again, start at the beginning. Put a stick here to remind myself. And I'm going to start up here and see if I find little pockets of soil or roots where I can integrate the aggregate soil into the existing soil. And as I'm doing this, I can see the aggregate soil fall between. This is also where roots will start popping up. And there's one right there. So I stick it around there, making sure I'm trying to integrate as much as I can into, this is a tie down. I'm going to see if I can just push it in a little bit to hide it. There we go. Try not to use a hammer, because you'll sooner or later hit the pot. Make yourself a, I can't even remember what the term is, but put a piece of wood further out here so you hit wood you hit the hammer way out from the pot so you don't bust your pot. Even if you think you'll be careful, there's a good chance you'll break it sooner or later. Okay. So I'm working my way through it. And in this one, you can, as I've hit something here, I can see soil falling down in. So I put more, because you don't want to leave any air pockets because roots don't grow in solid air pockets, just like they don't grow in solid wet soil. They also do not like air pockets, and you want to maximize the pot's capacity to create roots in a tight space. We're going to restrict them, but at the same time, we also want to maximize the ability to get the roots we want. There's a little piece here. Just slightly push that in. Some spots there. Turn the pot. And I don't know if I said this, but I'll repeat it. I brought it over here on the table so when the soil falls off, I'll be able to collect it back up and use it for another pot rather than doing it on the turntable. Turn it again. You can see the right in here, I found a little hole where the soil was falling in. And after a while it stops, and then I move on. You can see I'm using a smaller chopstick up here rather than the bigger one to fit in the tighter spaces. Again, I'm keeping my left hand. Sometimes you want to put your finger, that's probably a better way to do it because it keeps the soil falling in and reduces, or not reduces, but decreases the chances that the roots will push their way up. We're almost around to the front. I lost my little stick. Next time I should put a little stick up there to remind myself where I began. But if you always start at the front of the tree and you remember what your front of the tree is, you should come back to home and be pretty good. I'm also slightly, as I go through this, pulling the soil away from the trunk a little bit because I know I'll be sweeping off the soil here in a little bit. Again, this is something you want to do correctly, but you don't want to overdo it. And I'm almost back home. And I'm back home. The next thing that we do, we take our little hemp broom and we sweep off the excess soil and attempt to contour the soil. I'm not like trying to think about what I'm doing. I'm just lightly doing it and letting the broom knock off the particles without really being very cautious or conscious of where I'm trying to get it high or low. I do know that when I get near the edge, I'm going to want to have about a 1/4 inch edge so that when I water it, water doesn't cascade off the edge of the pot and make it difficult to water. Over the course of time, roots, when they start to fill up the pot, will actually start to push the root ball up, and there will be a point, and for a lot of cases, where that 1/4 inch little edge gets lost when the tree gets older and becomes more root bound. Found a little bamboo tie down that exposed as I was cleaning off the aggregate. As you're cleaning, you can see roots pop up. Don't pull. Gently pull them a little bit without pulling them out, because if you pull them, you're going to pull a whole bunch more roots out than you want. And go in and just cut the roots that came up cleanly. Now I'm trying to work a little bit on getting my little edge so that the water stays in the pot. Found a few more roots that have come up. So we cleanly cut them. Cleanly cut roots, or anything that's cleanly cut, will heal better than ragged ends or torn things. So make sure you do that. Again, I found a little bit of a bamboo tie down over there. Just push it in a wee little bit. This chopstick. And then I will, luckily it's not high enough, it will, when I put the top dressing on, will probably hide that. Okay. Now that we've contoured the bottom for the soil, we are going to use a mixture of sphagnum, shredded sphagnum, and shredded moss that grows on sidewalks and things like that. You collect it, you either pick it apart or you put it on a screen and run it through the screen and get rid of anything that falls below a 1/16 of an inch or that screen, and then you mix it up 50-50 and you gently place it around the soil. You don't completely cover the soil, and at the same time, so you can still see soil particles as you are placing it. You've also noticed that I cleaned up the table of all of the aggregate soil and put it back in a bag, and I'll use it later. The other thing that I can do with this is, I found some big pieces of moss in here, so I'm just tearing them apart as I put them on. So I'm going around trying to evenly distribute the sphagnum as well as the green moss. The green moss, you can collect it immediately and use it. You can also dry it out, and it can get bone dry and it will still work. The spores will regenerate itself. And if you had a tie down, what you would do is maybe take a little extra sphagnum moss, put it on top, put a little green moss on top, and try to hide it that way. In this case, I don't see any. And the next thing I'm going to do is the moss and sphagnum that went over the edge of the pot, you can sweep it back up and use it for your next tree. The next thing that you do before you water this is you take a mist bottle and from a distance slightly mist the sphagnum and moss because it's very light, and if you would go out and spray water on that with a hose, it might all blow off and all of the time that you put in as well as the top dressing could be blown away and all your work is in the wind. A few little pieces of aggregate. So again, it doesn't have to be completely soaked, but enough to wet it so it holds. The soil is now ready to be thoroughly watered to wash out all of the small particles and open up as much oxygen space as possible. It is important that you water gently so as not to disturb the top dressing and or wash out soil particles. You will water it until the water drains out clearly. After the pot has been allowed to drain, it is watered again thoroughly just to ensure that the water drains out clearly and that all the particles have been removed and as much oxygen space is remaining, period. When water stops draining out of the pot, I then tilt it to one side to allow excess water to be removed from the pot. The roots will benefit from a little more oxygen, especially after they have been root pruned and need time to heal and compartmentalize the damage that was done. After water stops draining on the one side, I will then tilt it to the other to allow excess water to drain. After water stops draining out from the one tilt, it is then tilted to the other side to allow as much water to leave the system as possible, period. Zoom 13 dubbing. This tree is now ready to return to the greenhouse. If this tree were repotted later in the season and temperatures were not going to freeze, this tree would be allowed to stay outside and experience warmer weather to start growing. The only issue would be to pay attention to wind as the leaves start coming out.